Good afternoon, literature, 7th and 8th grade. It's afternoon for me. I don't know when it is for you. I am happy to say almost everybody has gotten the Rags and Riches quizzes done. I have one person who somehow managed to skip 5. I don't know how. Anyway, Christmas Carol, we're getting there, slowly but surely, getting everybody turned in and caught up with quiz 1. That's as far as I've made it so far. Remember, this is what your actual packet will look like. The first page is the cause and event. I've been telling you which ones you can work on as we're reading through the book. So far, you've been able to answer the first 6. After today, you'll be able to answer 7 and 8, but don't turn it in yet. And, of course, I changed this into an LMS quiz. This will be due on the 17th. Then you have the vocab. It says it's a vocabulary test. It's not. It's a quiz. It's an activity. Use the dictionary. This is due on the 17th. Then you have the characterization of the spirits. Friday of last week, you should have done the characterization of the first spirit, which I turned into an LMS quiz. This one you will do today, Thursday. It's actually Wednesday for me, but Thursday, to turn in on Friday the characterization of the second spirit. So I would have this open on LMS so you can be answering that while you're listening to me. Then, of course, you have the actual quizzes that go with the staves, which I've just turned into LMS quizzes. Today, of course, you'll be doing Stave 3 quiz. So, now let's get into the actual reading. I've got my apple cider here so I don't get completely dehydrated reading. So, Stave 1, or Act 1. We met Scrooge and his nephew and the lecturer, the clerk that works for him, and just figured out Scrooge is just an all-around not nice person. And then his partner, the ghost of his partner, Jacob Marley, shows up and says that he will be visited by 3 ghosts. The first ghost is who he met in Stave 3, the ghost of Christmas Past, who came and showed him his past. So we begin to see some kind of softening of Scrooge a little bit. Get to see some of the hard times that he went through. And maybe a little bit of softening of his attitude. Now we're starting on Stave 3. So you should have your book out following along as I'm reading Stave 3. After Ghost of Christmas Past left, Scrooge falls asleep. So, Stave 3 starts with, awakening in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was once again upon the stroke of 1. Now remember, the first ghost showed up at 1 in the morning, which is very confusing to Scrooge because he fell asleep after 1 in the morning and he knows he didn't sleep through the day, and then it's 1 in the morning and the first ghost shows up. Now it's once again 1 in the morning, and he knows he hasn't slept through the day again. Something weird is going on with time. He felt that he was restored to consciousness right in the right nick of time, for the especial purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But finding out that he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his cards this new spectre would draw back, he put them every one aside with his own hands, and lying down again, established a sharp lookout all round the bed. For he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of his appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. Gentlemen of the free and easy sort, who plumed themselves on being acquainted with a move or two, and being usually equal to the time of day, express the wide range of their capacity for adventure, but observing that they are good for anything from pitch and toss to manslaughter, between which opposite extremes, no doubt, there lies a tolerably wide and comprehensive range of subjects. Without venturing for Scrooge quite as hardly as this, I don't mind calling on you to believe that he was ready for a good broad field of strange appearances, and that nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros would have astonished him very much. So in other words, nothing that showed up would surprise Scrooge at this point. Now, being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing. And consequently, when the bell struck 1, and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. He knows some kind of ghost is supposed to show up. He knows something weird is supposed to happen. And when nothing at all happened, he's like, this is just really weird. This is really kind of flipping me out. What is going on? Sweetie. And so, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, yet nothing came. All this time he lay upon his bed, the very core and center of a blaze of ruddy light, which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which, being only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, as he was powerless to make out what it meant or would be at, and was sometimes apprehensive that he might be at that very moment an interesting case of spontaneous combustion, without having the consolation of having known it. At last, however, he began to think, as you or I would have thought at first, for it is always the person not in the predicament who knows what ought to have been done in it, and would unquestionably have done it too, at least I say. He began to think that the source and the secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room, from whence, upon further tracing it, it seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. So he realizes there's some kind of light out there, and he's beginning to realize that, hold it, maybe I've got to get up and go into the other room to see what's going on. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice called him by his name and bade him enter. He obeyed. It was his own room, there was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceilings were so hung with living green that it looked like a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney, as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many and many a winter a season gone. Heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch, in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. "Come in!" exclaimed the ghost. "Come in and know me better, man." Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before the spirit. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet him. "I am the ghost of Christmas present," said the spirit. "Look upon me." Scrooge reverently did so. Now, this is where, after you read this, I would pause it and fill out the description of the ghost, because the second spirit is the ghost of Christmas present. We just read that. And we're going to read a description of what the guy looks like. And with him comes this light that just kind of lights up this whole room. And he's sitting on this throne when Scrooge first meets him, made of food. Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple deep green robe or mantle, bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on its figure that its capacious breast was bare. So the chest of this giant was bare, and he's wearing this big green robe that has white fur on it, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by an artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath, set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheerious voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it. The scabbard's the thing that holds the sword, but there's no sword in the scabbard. And the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. "You have never seen the like of me," exclaimed the spirit. "Never," Scrooge made answer to it. "Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family. meaning, for I'm very young. My elder brother is born in these later years, pursued the phantom. Don't think I have, said Scrooge. I am afraid I have not. Have you had many brothers, Spirit? More than 1,800, said the ghost. A tremendous family to provide for, muttered Scrooge. In other words, they're in the 1800s, so there is one of these ghosts one for every year, and they're all considered brothers. The ghost of Christmas present rose. Spirit, said Scrooge submissively, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. So this is very different than what we've seen before from Scrooge. Touch my robe. Scrooge did as he was told, and held it fast. Holly, mistletoe, red berries, ivy, turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, meat, pigs, sausages, oysters, pies, puddings, fruit, and punch all vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow, the hour of the night, and they stood in the city streets on Christmas morn, where, for the weather was severe, the people made a rough but brisk and not unpleasant kind of music, and scraping the snow from the pavement in front of their dwellings and from the tops of their houses, whence it was mad delight to the boys to see it come plumping down into the road below, and splitting into artificial little snowstorms. The house fronts looked black enough, and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs, and with the dirtier snow upon the ground, which last deposit had been plowed up in deep furrows by the heavy wheels of carts and wagons, furrows that crossed and recrossed each other hundreds of times, where the great streets branched off and made intricate channels, hard to trace in the thick yellow mud and icy water. The sky was gloomy, and the shortest streets were choked up with a dingy mist, half thawed, half frozen, whose heavier particles descended in a shower of sooty atoms, as if all the chimneys in Great Britain had by one consent caught fire, and were blazing away to their hearts' content. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavored to diffuse in vain. And in other words, think about how dark and dismal and dirty London is. We got that from the Rags and Riches book. Then think about it. When you have snow and it starts to melt, it gets kind of dirty looking anyway. Add to the fact that London's dirty to begin with. The snow's melting with more snow being piled on top. It's going to be dirty and dingy, and it's cold and it's snowy. But at the same time, it's Christmas. So there's this liveliness in the air that comes with people being out buying stuff for Christmas and just being happy about Christmas. At this time, there would have been carolers and people out in the streets, like we read about in the Rags and Riches book, singing. For the people who were shoveling away on the housetops were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a facetious snowball. Better-natured missile far than many a wordy jest, laughing heartily if it went right, and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterers' shops were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. There were great round pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the doors and tumbling out into the street in their apoplectic opulence. There were ruddy, brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions, shining in the fatness of their growth like Spanish friars, and winking from their shelves in wanton slyness at the girls as they went by, and glancing demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples clustered high in blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes made in the shopkeeper's benevolence to dangle from conspicuous hooks that people's mouths might water gratis as they passed. In other words, they were watering freely as they passed. There were piles of filberts, mossy and brown, recalling in their fragrance ancient walks among the woods, and pleasant shufflings ankle-deep through weathered leaves. There were Norfolk biffins, squab and swarthy, setting off the yellow of the oranges and lemons, and the great compactness of their juicy persons, urgently entreating and beseeching to be carried home in paper bags and eaten after dinner. The very gold and silver fish set forth among these choice fruits in a bowl, though members of a dull and stagnant-blooded race, appeared to know that there was something going on, and to a fish went gasping round and round their little world in slow and passionless excitement. The grocers, nearly closed, with perhaps 2 shutters down or one. But through those gaps, such glimpses. It was not alone that the scales descending on the counter made a merry sound, or that the twine and roller parted company so briskly, or that the canisters were rattled up and down like juggling tricks, or even that the blended scents of tea and coffee were so grateful to the nose, or even that the raisins were so plentiful and greater, the almonds so extremely white, the sticks of cinnamon so long and straight, the other spices so delicious, the candied fruits so caked and spotted with molten sugar, as to make the coldest lookers-on feel faint and yeah. In other words, he's going on and on describing this wonderful picture of people out buying things, selling things for Christmas. Lots and lots of food that would have been common at that time, not necessarily at our time. And I'm just going to skip to the next paragraph. You can read that whole paragraph, but you get the point. But soon the steeples called good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with their happiest faces. And at the same time there emerged from scores of by-streets, lanes, and nameless turnings, innumerable people carrying their dinners to the baker's shop. The sight of these poor revelers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as the bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once or twice when there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled each other, he shed a few drops of water on them from it, and their good humor was restored directly. For they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day, and so it was. God love it, so it was. In time the bells ceased, and the bakers were shut up, and yet there was a genial shadowing forth of all these dinners, and the progress of their cooking in the thawed blotch of wet above each baker's oven, where the pavement smoked as if stones were cooking too. Is there a particular flavor in what you sprinkle from your torch? Asked Scrooge. There is. My own. Would it apply to any kind of dinner on this day? Asked Scrooge. To any kindly given. To a poor one most. Why to a poor one most? Asked Scrooge. Because it needs it most. Hint, that's a question on your Stave 3 quiz. Spirit, said Scrooge after a moment's thought, I wonder, you, of all the beings in the many worlds about us, should desire to cramp these people's opportunities of innocent enjoyment. I, cried the spirit. You would deprive them of their means of dining every 7th day, often the only day on which they can be said to dine at all, said Scrooge. Wouldn't you? I, cried the spirit. You seek to close these places on the 7th day, said Scrooge, and it comes to the same thing. I seek, exclaimed the spirit. Forgive me if I am wrong. It has been done in your name, or at least in that of your family, said Scrooge. There are some upon this earth of yours, returned the spirit, who lay claim to know us, who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are as strange to us and all our kith and kin as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings on themselves, not on us. Scrooge promised that he would, and they went on, invisible as they had been before, into the suburbs of the town. It was a remarkable quality of the ghost, which Scrooge had observed at the baker's, that notwithstanding his gigantic size, he could accommodate himself to any place with ease. And they stood beneath a low roof quite as gracefully and like a supernatural creature as it was possible he could have done in any lofty hall. In other words, he's kind of shrinking, growing, depending on the size of the room. And perhaps it was the pleasure the good spirit had in showing off this power of his, or else it was his own kind, generous, hearty nature, and his sympathy with all poor man that led him straight to Scrooge's clerk. For there he went and took Scrooge with him, holding onto his robe and onto the threshold of the door. The spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinklings of his torch. Think of that. Bob had but 15 bob a week himself. Bob being the second Bob, being a type of money. He pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed his 4-room house. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed on but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for 6pence. And she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons. while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes and getting the corners of his monstrous shirt collar, Bob's private property, conferred upon his son in air in honor of the day, into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable parks. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own. And basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he, not proud, although his collars nearly choked him, blew the fire until the slow potatoes bubbling up knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. So there's the 2 older Cratchits, then there's Peter, then there's the 2 younger Cratchits, so he has either 5 or 6 children. One has ever got your precious father then, said Mrs. Cratchit, and your brother Tiny Tim, so yes, there's 6 of them. And Martha weren't as late last Christmas Day by half an hour. Here's Martha, mother, said a girl, appearing as she spoke. Here's Martha, mother, said the 2 young Cratchits. Hurrah! There's such a goose, mother. Why, blast your heart alive, my dear, how late you are, said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times and taking off her shawl and bonnet for her with officious zeal. We'd a deal of work to finish up last night, replied the girl, and had to clear away this morning, mother. Well, never mind, so long as you are come, said Mrs. Cratchit. Sit ye down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm. Lord bless ye. No, there's father coming, cried the 2 young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. Hide, Martha, hide. So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, that's like a scarf, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim!